Yes, I'm the director of Albert, and as some of you may know, my previous role was in National Grid, and I was predominantly focused on transport decarbonisation. And I was mainly pointing out to government that there's a bit of a catch-22 in that service stations didn't see the demand yet on the road for electric charging vehicle infrastructure, and at the same time, consumers, drivers said, well, I'm concerned about the range anxiety. So while I was speaking to the government about this, I was also working with our brilliant colleagues inside National Grid, who were working on our own strategy to decarbonise our own fleet. And, I suppose it's sort of similar to the whole, making sure our industry is walking the walk so that we are able to talk the talk too. So Lorna was absolutely critical to that work. And I think it's fair to say Lorna is a bit of a green fleet queen.
For some reason, the health and safety thing, I had it on and...
Oh, sorry, Sarah, could you please go on mute?
Sorry about that. Just under the call at the same time, sorry.
No problem, thank you. So yeah, it's fair to say Lorna is a green fleet queen, quite literally an award-winning fleet manager who's been responsible for leading fleet decarbonisation at both National Grid and the Royal Mail. So I'm hoping that we can share some really interesting insights from her, what's been going on and what is coming down the tracks for our industry too. So firstly, Lorna, can I hand over to you to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you do day to day?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much. I feel like I've got a lot to live up to now with everything that Siobhan said before, what you've just said
Sorry,
there now as well. So it's, no, as you said, I'm at National Grid as the fleet manager. Previously, I was at Royal Mail as the fleet manager, so that was 48,000 vehicles to look after. I also used to have to do the Christmas hires as well. So every year I brought in an additional 7,000 vehicles and then got rid of an additional 7,000 vehicles in the space of a few months. Before that, I was even at E.ON, so I've been in and around the sustainability side of vehicles for quite some time now, and it was over 10 years ago that I put our first electric vans onto fleet at E.ON. So it's taken all those lessons, working through all those barriers that came up then when they weren't really around. I got in my first ever van and we drove it from Westwood up to our Sherwood offices, and my colleague drove it back and I followed him, and he'd got his coat off, he'd got the windscreen wipers, he was trying not to use them in the rain, and he broke down a mile from where we needed to get to, opposite a BP fuel station and Peugeot garage, and it was a Peugeot Ion, and he was kind of stranded and couldn't do anything. So those were the days of when it really was a challenge. It's so much easier now. So there's been quite a transition, and as you said, there's been a lot of work with all of those lessons learned from the early adopters, taken us into the government space and influencing and working in clean air zones. I did a lot of the clean air zone work when I was at Royal Mail. And Karis, you may remember we met before we even met at National Grid, because we did the party political conferences when I took the electric van from Royal Mail there as well.
Right,
so
yeah.
It's been in and around for a while, just learning and then being able to help colleagues and peers on their journeys as well, because there's no point going through that pain yourself and then just watching others do the same when you can help them transition easily. So that's been a big focus of what's been happening lately, is to help others on that journey as well.
Well, that's a perfect segue into, I suppose, what the purpose of this session is then. And particularly as charging infrastructure is a big concern to productions. In fact, Joe Finnan, who I'm not sure if he's joined the call yet, but from Sky, asked when we'll start to see improvements in the charging facilities around the UK to reduce charging to less than 30 minutes. And I know from my time at National Grid, the UK government had committed to 6 ultra rapid charging points at every service station by 2023, and it's been a tough couple of years, it's fair to say. I wonder what the latest is on that, and how on target are we for reaching that? Have you got any updates that you can share?
So yeah, I'd love to say they're absolutely on target, but I think they're a wee bit busy at the moment. So we were expecting the delivery body to be announced before Christmas. We were then expecting some things to come out in the last few weeks, and I think something's happening somewhere in Europe that's kind of caused a few challenges for the government at the moment. So word on the great is we're expecting April to to now see that delivery body announced and the work physically starting on getting those rapid chargers. So the bit you're talking about there is Project Rapid, where there was 950 million of the government spend dedicated to getting the motorway services up to date. Personally, I think once we get those in, we'll be doing it again, and we'll be putting even more in. So it's a first stab. And the only reason I say that is COVID brought with it a bunch of opportunities. And those opportunities were for corporates, and the government changes to the tax allowances and everything else meant that the uptake in EVs has far surpassed a lot of people's expectations in the UK. So the UK was the 4th largest economy in terms of how many EVs they took this year. So, and November, we had 1 in 5 were EVs. December, it was 1 in 4 were EVs coming into the corporate space and being purchased. So the cars are now starting to ramp up rapidly, which is probably why, was it Joe that was asking about the infrastructure? And it's a chicken and egg. It's one of those things that the more charging infrastructure you put out, for a long time, charging infrastructure sat idle and people were losing money on it. That's why Ecotricity was then bought out by Gridserve, who have now upgraded everything, because the early ones that were putting it in were struggling with that transition side of it as well. But we're seeing, as you said, that Project Rapid, which is massive surge going into the motorway network. Gridserve have been upgrading all the Ecotricity chargers anyway in that network, so you get there now, and they've got the 120 kilowatt chargers going in. Ionity are starting to move through a lot of the common places as well. So where you get your big hubs, you've got the Tesla network that's been continuing to expand, that does all the Tesla vehicles. So there's an awful lot happening there. And there were some beautiful graphics, and I was trying to find them so I could get them for you, and I just couldn't find where they were. They were on LinkedIn, that shows a physical map of all the dots basically and how it builds up over the last few years. And you see this rapid changing to the infrastructures out there. But it's not all about rapid, because what you need to bear in mind as well when you're doing your infrastructures and everything else, if you've got bases and people are going there to work and they're there all day, you only need 7 kilowatt chargers. You don't need the rapid ones to charge those vehicles, because they're destination locations and people get to park and then they charge there all day. So unless you've got limited parking spaces and you constantly need to move vehicles around, then don't go to the expense of the bigger, faster stuff when you don't need to do it. Hotels are the same. If you're a hotel with conferences, you might want rapid chargers. If you're hotels with overnight and people just sleep there, which is exactly what they do, then you park the vehicle and you charge it on a slower one. And it's the same with corporates and what you're doing. If you've got temporary locations, you might want faster chargers, you might want public stuff. If you've got depots and home, then you might go for your home and depot charging instead. So it's getting the right mix with what you're trying to do, because one solution isn't going to solve it for everyone.
Yeah.
But it's amazing to see at the moment, now that we've got a slight supply issue on vehicles, the pace at which chargers are going in. It's absolutely phenomenal.
So it's about the kind of the needs case and meeting that, and not just going for the fastest, biggest, greatest because it seems the best. That's the best for perhaps en route charging. But if you've got, you know, a big car parking space and you know people have got long dwell time, making use of that, yeah. It's ironic, isn't it? Is it ironic, isn't it, that there's this rapid increase and the Project Rapid isn't quite meeting its deadline? So beyond April then, and beyond that 6 ultra rapid chargers by 2023, are we expecting to see a trickle on the strategic road network, or do you think it's going to be happening in steps? What can the production industry expect to see in terms of this sort of on journey charging increments?
To be honest, I don't know the answer and how they're planning to tackle it. Okay. What I will say is the demand is going to force them to move faster than they think they realise they need to move. So because we're seeing it everywhere else, there's going to be such a pull on it. And even if they are trickling it out and going through strategic hotspots, because they have mapped out where some of the hotspots are of where people go to, but so have the independent charging companies. So have the Ospreys of the world, the MERS of the world, the Gridserves. So there's a lot more investment coming in from the private sector as well. And there's a lot of money that's gone to local councils to look at charging in the local council areas as well. So I know several years ago, Enola Homes was filled near where I lived. I'd walked into the car park and I thought, what's all this stuff around? What are all these trailers and everything else? But you think if the council managed to get all the chargers in there, then you've got this base and a destination place for people to go to anyway, to then charge up and use it. So it's getting that balance right. So even if Project Rapid isn't quite as rapid as we hoped it was with their 6 chargers for each of the motorways, the rest of the independent networks are certainly catching up and putting a line. And the other things you'll find, if you get some good business relationship with the corporates, they'll open up their car parks. I mean, we talked about National Grid at the head office. There's a multi-storey car park next door that can be isolated. And we're on about letting the Commonwealth Games use the chargers that we've got for that duration when they're doing that event in the area. So if you can do something with the corporates, you'll find corporates will open up some of their charge points for you as well.
Interesting. All right. So just to move on a bit to kind of alternatives, if you can't use an electric vehicle, what is the least worst alternative? And I think, Will, you've got some insights from the Albert carbon calculator as to what typically productions are using as alternatives. Is that right?
Yeah, sorry. So we've been exploring, and it's become increasingly popular in the industry, the use of HVO and biofuels from waste products, because then you don't need to worry about not so much anyway, the agricultural emissions in growing crops, and we've noticed that that's had great success with diesel HGVs because it's a direct drop in fuel. And with one case study, it's even increased fuel efficiency by, it's been just over 1%, but it's still a little bit, and that's been really great to see.
It's still burning stuff. So actually, it's a good point, because one of the challenges I have in the industry, and a lot of my peers have in the industry, is jargon, and it's greenwashing, and it's brainstorming things. So I'll kind of cover 2 things at once. So you're right, biomasses and biofuels are a great stepping stone alternative, because the point I said, they still burn things, so they're not actually sanctioned as a zero emissions fuel. But even with those that are trying to sell them as carbon negative fuels, they're not, because they're only carbon negative if you've already got dead trees that you're using and the products that are going into it, and there's not enough of that stuff around to keep those fuels going. So there's a load of technical bits that can go into that as well. But you're right, absolutely. HVO, especially with all the tax that's gone on the red diesel stuff. So anybody that used to get exemptions for using the red diesel, forget it. You haven't got a cat's chance in hell of getting anything through there. So HVO is a great alternative, because the other fame-free stuff that you can use, you have issues in if your generators are too old and it doesn't run on that stuff anyway. So you're into the white diesel. So unless you can go into hydrogen route for that, which is again is another alternative that's being looked at. But again, with hydrogen, I noticed somebody asked in the chat earlier about whether charge points were on green energy as well. All of these things depend on how they come. And there's about, I'm going to get it wrong, I thought there was 9, but there might be 11 different colours of hydrogen. So you've got green, blue, pink, yellow, grey, brown, black, and there's a new one called turquoise. So depending on them, so the green and blues are seen as the clean ones, but yellow is solar. I forgot what pink is now. Wind. Pink is wind. So you've got all the different technologies that are coming through as well. So hydrogen is an alternative. Biofuels is a temporary alternative. You've also got other things you can do, even if you have to stick to diesel. So I'm working with a company called Trailer, and that's with an A at the end of it, spelled incorrectly, but they put solar panels on the roof of some of our vehicles. So even though I'm in a diesel, when I'm powering my ancillary equipment, I'm able to use the power from there to help the 12-volt battery last longer, not drain as much, and do more efficiencies there. So even if you can't go whole hog on a different fuel type at the moment, there are things you can put in that help run the ancillary equipment or help reduce your carbon footprint whilst you wait for those alternatives to come to marketplace. And again, going back to the other point I was going to try and tackle at the same time, the jargon busting bit.
Yeah.
There's a lot of greenwashing out there at the moment. I know my fellow colleagues out there and some of the charge point one, we would just love to ban Toyota from TV at the moment, because them selling mild hybrids is just a complete fabrication. And the self-charging hybrid, how can you have a self-charging hybrid? You need to plug a car. It just doesn't works. So there's a lot of greenwashing out there and a lot of marketing that are unfortunately giving people the wrong impression of what they can do. It's a bit like I said on the carbon negative fuels. Actually, if you follow it all the way through, it's not quite there. So it's being careful with what's out there. It's understanding the stepping stones, but knowing that you are going to have to go, it's inevitable, you are going to need an EV at some point or a hydrogen solution. Those are the only two fuels that are going to work in one way or another. But it's the stepping stones you can take until those is out. And in the heavy goods industry, for example, that is one of those where you would continue to use a biofuel as an alternative until the hydrogen or the catenary solutions come out. And I can cover that in a minute as well.
That was going to be my next question, actually, Lorna. Sort of, it sounds like there are lots of alternatives that you just mentioned that would be doable. Hybrids, are they always bad?
It depends on the driver.
Okay, yeah, it's consumer behaviour basically, isn't it?
It is, because with hybrids, it was a tax dodge for an awful lot of people. So hybrids came into the fleet, they didn't even bother using the electric. When they went to the auctions, they found that the cable was still got the plastic things around it because they hadn't even bothered. It was a tax dodge. And what you ended up with a lot of hybrids then is a really, really heavy vehicle with a less efficient engine, because it was catering for the hybrid side, the electric side as well, that was then useless. Some of the newer hybrids are better because they've got a better electric range, and people, therefore, if they've only got a commute that's 15 to 20, I think the best is the Mercedes A-Class 1 that's got a 40-mile range on it. If you can do that commute to work on that electric, and then you can charge at work, and then you can do your commute home, then those hybrids are fine as a stepping stone getting yourselves into it.
Okay, that's really clear. Thanks, Lorna. And so just wanted to cover that off before we moved on to other modes. So you just started touching on heavier goods, HGVs. Where's this got to? Because I know there's quite a lot of exploration. We're not backing a horse yet, are we, as a society? And there's a question as to whether electricity in a new form, not necessarily a battery because it's weighty and you've got freight to carry, or if it's hydrogen, and there's trials and so on going on. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, there's lots of stuff going in that space at the moment, and the answer is probably nearly always electricity in one form or another, because even with hydrogen, the cleanest hydrogen is the electrolyzed hydrogen, but then it's about the efficiencies. So the government hasn't actually backed one because we're too early in the innovation phase to try and pick one over the other, especially as hydrogen has a place, and a very clear place, especially when it comes to things like aviation and shipping, when you talk about those industries. Hydrogen doesn't necessarily work in a car, because cars, we've proved the battery technology is just there. It just works. And every year we're getting bigger and better batteries, more efficient ones coming out, the rapid chargers that are coming out. So the technology is evolving at a rapid pace to support that electricity transition on the smaller side. There are some areas that aren't being touched at all. So we're not getting 4x4 vehicles yet. No manufacturers planning to bring them to the market until 2024 at the earliest. So trying to get those through. Believe in those, unless you're a utility industry like us, or you're doing some of what you're doing with the production, you're going off-road a lot of the time or anything else and carrying plenty of kit with you, that's where you might want a hydrogen instead of an electric, because you might need that more splash and dash technology to fill up to then get yourselves to there while you're still operating the other pieces of equipment. Okay. And then you've got catenary as well. So we have to bear in mind, so for those that don't know what catenary is, think of it like your dodgems at a fairground ride, or your old tramway systems. It's literally, you have a pantograph on the top of your motive unit, as it drives down that slow lane of the motorway, literally it lifts up, connects to the cables overhead, goes down. When those trucks then come to go off the motorways, they disconnect themselves, they then drive off, do the last little bit of their journey on their full electric batteries, and then they'll charge in the depots as well, and then you do the same in there. And the reason, so we've got trials of hydrogen up in the Tees area, Tyne area, so there's lots going on there, and there's some shipping, and they're bundling it all together. You've got the catenary solution going in, but you'll have to forgive me, I can't remember where they're planning on doing that trial. And the reason they're having to look at this is, although we've Brexited, we are totally reliant and do a lot of what happens in Europe. So the trucks go from one to the other. So the moment you get across that water, what solution then do you need across the other side? So we have to stay as consistent as we can with the solutions coming from everywhere. So although we might decide in the UK, no, we're going to go hydrogen and everything, it's great. Actually, if everywhere else is catenary, then you're going to restrict what you're able to do when it comes to trade. So
Absolutely.
it's keeping one eye on what's happening in the marketplace with what we're doing here as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point about kind of it's not operating in isolation given the supply chains cross borders. And that's quite a good segue to a question that we had in from someone attending. I don't have anyone to attribute it to, so sorry about this, but if you want to raise your hand, please do when I read this out. But is a question on how we can encourage or support suppliers. This industry has a fairly significant supply chain in the transition to greener fleets without massive costs being put onto productions. Are there any tips or advice that you could give our industry on how we can help shift them? Is it just about asking the question?
So yeah, the first thing is I would always ask those questions. I think it's an interesting point is what are the companies that are your suppliers? So because those companies, if they're buying vehicles for their people to use, then they still benefit from a lot of the tax rates that the government have put in. So actually a lot of the vehicles at the moment are cost neutral. They're not necessarily that much more expensive, depending on how they've purchased their vehicles and brought them in. And that's not going to be the same for everyone because it depends whether it's a hire and reward type. So I'm smiling at Claire Chung's with Enterprise, they never have enough vehicles. I'll explain that in a moment because now is not the time you want to be a fleet manager. The marketplace is absolutely dire. But anyway, it's understanding then what you can do with that supply chain to push it. And it's understanding we are still at the early stage of that hockey stick, that uptick and uptake. So whilst there's some great news in terms of the corporates, it's not mass market yet. So there's still new technologies coming in. There's still some glitches with some of the technology coming in, if I'm being brutally honest. We've still got issues with vans not quite doing what it says on the tin when it comes to the mileage, because the OEMs are focusing on the quick stuff they can get out to recover their production costs and their research and development costs. But there are grants, there are innovation pieces out there. Most of the suppliers, depending on how they are as suppliers, can tap into some of that. It is going to run out. There isn't an infinite pit, so now is the time to encourage those people to do it. A lot of the reason people think it's more expensive is they don't understand it. They don't know how to do this. They haven't looked to it in enough detail. They haven't tried in the whole supply chain side of it, tried to do the bits that they can quite easily and then worry about some of the other stuff. As you'll know, Caris, the work Grid's been doing as well is working with government, it's working with the distribution network operators, it's trying to smooth the application process for putting chargers in to bring that cost down as well and level that playing field out. Basically change what's been 30-year-old, I'm going to be careful how I say this now, archaic ways of working. It's been a reactive way of working and we're now in a proactive marketplace. Yeah. So it's pushing that other. So it's having the conversations because every corporate, everyone who operates is under the same sustainability targets. Scope emissions 1, 2 and 3 are not going away. They are on people's responsibility charters. They are having to do this themselves anyway. So it's understanding what you can do to work with. And what we're finding at the moment is there's a lot of collaboration happening. As I said, go and talk to corporates out there. If you're pitching up on site, you can use their charge points. There's a lot of collaboration happening out there at the moment with people willing to help each other to try and bring some of those costs down. But for your own stuff, do the easy stuff that you can. Go with the easy bits, learn, tiptoe into it if you have to and not panic. And then don't try to do too much. It's going back to don't put the rapids in if you don't need rapid chargers, because that's just a cost that you don't need to stomach at this point in time.
Brill, thanks, Lorna. And I've got a sort of final question here that I might actually bring Daniel, who I think is here from Green Smarter Cars. Yeah, there you are, spotted you. Just about the options for shoots for hiring electric vehicles and where that market is now.
Hiring, forget it. I feel sorry for the hire cars. Go on, Daniel.
Yeah, it's been tough. Well, it's a tough transition. Factoring the driver and the consumer. At the moment, we are very much in the middle of this transition where charging a vehicle massively disrupts a private hire driver. And they only earn while they're working. Most of them are self-employed. 95% of them are self-employed. So if they're sat at a charging station for 2 hours, that is a significant chunk of their day. We have migrated our entire fleet now, outside of the executive and the MPV ranges, to zero emission. The ID3s are what we use. And we actually have 60 Toyota Mirai, which are hydrogen cars. So that's our standard car offering.
Have you only got those Mirais down in London?
We do only have those down in London, yes. There is now one charging station in Birmingham, which helps.
It's Tisley, isn't it? I know, that's what's doing my Warwick hydrogen car, because we put some up in Rotherham and then they closed the filling station down.
Yes, the filling stations are a lot less reliable than the cars, but the drivers absolutely love the cars because they can fill up in 2-3 minutes and they get 350 miles as you do in a petrol car. And they absolutely love it. But I think it was 2 weeks ago, every station was down in London. Not for long, but at one time, maybe just for an hour, every station was down and they suddenly couldn't fill up their cars. So that the infrastructure, again, which I think I joined slightly late, but I heard Lorna and Karis mention the infrastructure is slightly behind where the whole industry and where we all want to be. But in terms of standard car, you now can do it. It's trickier for long journeys, and I think there's a mentality shift for the passenger and the driver here. That if you want to go to, I'm going to use an example. We needed to get, we had a corporate and they had a meeting, and it was basically in Devon, but sustainability was also a key factor. And we just said to them, well, you're going to have a long coffee break at a station, a charging station, because there's no other way. If you really want sustainable vehicles, there is no other way of getting there. You are going to have to be patient. And in the end, they did it with a lot of persuasion. The sustainability did win. And we have a contract with a cruise company, and the terminals are all at the coast for obvious reasons, but the people don't all live there. So these people are having to adjust their way of travel if sustainability is key to their targets. But we are getting there. We've now, this has been going on for about 6 months, that we've transitioned to a completely standard car zero emission fleet. We're looking for MPVs. There aren't any yet. So
there aren't any,
and
they won't do the mileage yet either.
No. We have though. We have now. We've just put an order in for 50 Teslas for the executive car range, which will be coming at the end of March. We have 200 executive cars, so it's a quarter of them. But again, we have to stagger it for.
Is that the EQS? You actually getting 50 EQS?
No, it's the. Oh. We're getting 25 threes and 25 EQSs. Yeah.
Can I interrupt, guys?
In PPs, we went into jargon, didn't we?
Yeah,
so MPVs are basically the people carriers.
People carriers,
yeah.
Are they?
Yeah.
Brilliant. All right.
Yeah.
So
people carriers.
We're going to be breaking out into breakout rooms shortly to continue the conversation in smaller groups. But before I do, I have one particularly cheeky question for you, Lorna. And it's partly on the basis that, of course, Albert's got two aims. The first is the sort of behind the scenes, off screen impacts. And then we've got the second aim to help the industry understand its opportunity on screen as well, right? So I guess my question is, in your opinion, not speaking with your National Grid hat on, so we're not inviting you to give us material that will help with National Grid corporate aims or anything, but where do you think there is a great opportunity that we could be putting something in a show that would help the transition to decarbonised transport Is there any kind of amazing idea that you have?
I think the biggest challenge is normalising things. And being at Royal Mail, I used to see the Royal Mail vehicle every now and again in a Doctor Who episode or something else. So to have it normalised where you take that Royal Mail vehicle, but you take the electric version of it instead, and you still put it in your Emmerdale and you still put it in your other programmes. That's one great way of just normalising what's going on out there. The other thing, I mean, we're seeing it. So, what's the program? There's a BBC4 program and it had a Polestar in it. They were driving around in Polestar. Now, corporates have about 25% electric vehicles now. They are the biggest users. So any program that's got company cars in it, effectively use them, but please don't do what the Labour Party did in theirs and put an i3 in and then stick an engine noise over the top, because electric vehicles are quiet, genuinely.
Well, there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity even there, isn't there? That, you know, if you've got a dramatic scene and you want to be stealthy, an electric vehicle can do that, but an engine can't.
Absolutely. So it's just doing it differently. You know, we want to normalise things and make it. I mean, you can even put a negative one in if you want, where you've got some casualty scene or Holby City or something where you're trying to get there, and the charging bay's been iced. And what that means is it's been a normal diesel vehicle has parked in front of the charging bay and you can't get to it to charge your vehicle. I don't know, have something. Instead of talking over the recycle bins, have them talking over while they're plugging their charger in at home. Have more houses that physically have a charger on the front of the door, or, you know, by the drive, so when you see that. So there are lots of ways to do it subtly and normalising it. I think that's what we're after, is normalising it.
Lovely.
Don't do it wrong. And
Yes.
put sound over the top.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lorna. I will hand back over to Siobhan to continue proceedings. Thanks for that. That was really, really interesting.